Hello, I'm Eliza, and I was super lucky to meet Eric and his team right when we were starting out with the Oregon Maple Project, right in 2020 in the pandemic. So we were able to be colleagues from the very beginning, and it's been really, really fortunate for us and great to have a sugaring community. This is an economics of Bigleaf maple sugaring presentation, which is kind of hilarious for all the people who know me because I run a nonprofit, emphasis on the non part of profit. But I will have some numbers in this presentation to go along with the pretty pictures. Just to kind of echo what I'm preaching to the choir here in terms of all the possibilities, looks like I've got some font issues as well, but hopefully you can read it. All the possibilities from the Bigleaf maple. And just thinking about the gifts from this tree has been maligned in the Northwest. And of course, we all know about the syrup, the possibilities of the sap economically being part of a business. And we've really been enjoying at the Oregon Maple Project the partially sweetened sap that works really well in cocktails and cooking. And we actually have a chef at Camp Colton, our location, who loves to come along when we're done boiling and we still have all this sweet stuff on the evaporator that we haven't been able to refrigerate or deal with, and he comes along and he's trying to make maple vinegar. He's just so excited to use it in cooking. So what to do with that leftover that is always at the end of a batch. There's lots of people that want to use that for different things besides syrup. Flowers, of course, being another part of what we can use from this tree. And I don't know if anybody's doing this, but I keep dreaming of another project, not for me, but Pacific Northwest Farm Forest CSA. Wouldn't it be cool if you use your forest land to have subscribers once a month get something from your Pacific Northwest forest? So it would be flowers in March, it'd be the sap in the early season, it'd be mushrooms when they're coming out, it would be salal, Oregon grape. So doing a CSA model of a business, I think, has a lot of potential. And the sugaring experience as something that we want people to have culturally, ecologically, as Eric was talking about. And also it's something you can sell. And so that can be a part of anybody's sugaring business. You can have retreats, you can have farm stays. People love coming to help with sugaring operations, and that is a big part of life in the Northeast where I'm from, and it is definitely something that we're trying to do with the Oregon Maple Project, and we find over and over again, it does not matter how old they are, where they come from, they jump up and down when they see the sap coming out of a tree, or when they can drill into a tree and have the sap run right out. So this is sort of overview of
When did it compute? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
That's right. It was working. Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. I know you want a break probably. So I'll just go over what the Oregon Maple Project, our nonprofit, does. We're focused on community sugaring. Can you do the next slide? And our mission, sorry about that, is we focus on experiential learning. So we do have a lot of school groups come, but it can be experiential learning for all ages, community partnership, and connection to nature. So getting people outdoors and understanding the magic of our Northwest forests. Next slide. We built a sugar shack, classic sugar shack, in the forest at Camp Colton. Next slide. I'll go through these pretty quickly. Camp Colton is a former summer camp, located in Clackamas County, southeast of Portland. There's 80 acres of mixed forest. It doesn't strike you as a big leaf rich forest at first, but there are over probably 1,000 trees, big leaves in there for tapping, and a beautiful confluence of two streams that flow into the Malala River. So it's a gorgeous place. There's overnight lodging. We hope that we can have the festival there next year. Next slide. We do a combination of buckets and tubing, mostly because we find that people love collecting from buckets, particularly kids. And so we have 100 buckets out in the woods, so which is completely not the most efficient way to do it, but it sure is the best way we've known how to learn what individual trees are doing. And it is the most engaging way to collect sap. And we wondered at the beginning if we needed maps for the kids who come collecting, if we needed to show them, okay, down this lane there are 15 taps, and this way, if you go that way, you'll have to get the 25 taps over here, but pretty much they just fan out through the woods and are on a giant Easter egg hunt. They find the shiny buckets and bring them back. We have a wood-fired Vermont 2x6 evaporator, and that is housed in our sugar shack. Next. And that's where we boil our sap to syrup. Pretty dark batch here, as you can see. Next one. And we work with students. And next one, families. This was actually, two of these women were from Ukraine, and they had amazing memories of their childhood of tapping birch trees for beverages. They all had cellars where they would put the birch sap until it started to ferment and became an alcoholic beverage. So they were really happy to have their children out tapping trees. Next. And community groups. So this is Outdoor Afro, an outdoor club. African American focus, and they come every year. Next one. And really cute small people. A couple of these. Next one, you can just keep through. And next. And really phenomenal helpers who I just had to show some photos of the people who are here at this conference. So there's Eric and Taylor, who is actually not here. Next one is Jer, who just showed up today. Jer, I don't know if you were hamming it up for that photo, but I think that's pretty much the poster child right there for Bigleaf maple sugaring. It's my favorite photo to use. Next. And Ben is Jer's going to be Jer's business partner in their new venture, so he wasn't able to come. He actually has COVID right now. But next one. And Jay, stoking the fire. So Jay and Allison here were part of our sugaring collective that I'll tell you about in a few minutes. Next. And none. She's back there. Next. Oh, that one got strange. Oh, dear. Okay, well, one of the things we do, in addition to hosting field trips and having families come to help us, volunteers coming, people having retreats or just tours and visits, we teach sugaring workshops. So a lot like the extension work. And this workshop, if we can see the whole photo properly, this workshop was one of our bigger ones. It was about 35 people in the middle of winter. It seemed like the February workshop was the sweet spot of really people wanting to go do something outdoors and learn. So these are all hobbyist type of folk. Although occasionally we get someone who wants to go commercial, but that is a bit more of our focus, is the hobbyists. Next slide. That one, and there's Allison there. This is a community boil. So we boiled 5 times last year, and every time we boil, we're using all the sap we've collected at Camp Colton from our taps. We have a tubing system and the buckets, and we also are taking sap from our sugaring collective members. So we started a sugaring collective last year, and we had 9 property owners who came to our workshop and learned about tapping procedures and got some preliminary supplies. And most of them put out about 25 taps. And then we just kept in touch by email the whole season, comparing notes, and it was fascinating because we all lived in greater Portland area, but in really different microclimates. So Jay and Allison they were frozen up a lot longer than the rest of us, and when we had that perfect December frost and the sap started flowing closer to Camp Colton, they were still frozen, and so we were able to say to each other, okay, well, just a couple more days, you'll probably get the flow, and then it happened. So lots of communication, and then the ability to bring sap here to our sugar shack and boil it together, and have a community event, and also then provide bottles of syrup to the property owners. So we just, this year, what we did is we calculated the sugar content and the amount of sap that they gave us, and gave the according amount of syrup afterwards. Next slide. Thank you. So numbers. Starting to have some numbers here, looking a little bit more like economics. These are just some of our stats of what we do. Some I've already mentioned, but we are about, seems like, I'm glad you were talking, Greg, about making less syrup than you sort of expect, because here you look at we're getting about 100 to 1 from our sap to syrup ratio there, and we would have expected to get a little bit more given our sugar content, but there's always that sap that's left on the evaporator, and different reasons why we might not get as much. But we did make 9 gallons of syrup, and we do not sell our syrup. We share it with all of our visitors and volunteers, with our sugaring collective members, and so far it's been a huge priority and will remain a huge priority for us to continue to have enough that every single person who comes to Camp Colton to visit us gets to taste it. So just every single group, we have high school groups that come and do trail work. Every single time they come, they get a nice taste of Bigleaf syrup because most people have never had it. We did lead 6 workshops last year and 5 school field trips, which was remarkable given that most schools were not allowed to go on field trips still due to COVID. And we had 375 people come through, and when they come, they work. And so they gave us 425 hours of service time. And in particular, it's 2 interns that we had, an OSU intern who just started College of Forestry, and a high school intern from Lincoln High School in Portland, and they put in 135 hours over the past year. We're up to 700 people on our mailing list. So we feel like we're starting to reach out more and more. Next slide. So we work a lot with hobbyists, and that's important to us because it can be really scary when you think about the bigger scale production. And it's really important to show people that you can just start out with a very small kit. And so we started selling these little kits with just making sure they've got their drill bit and their cheesecloth for filtering and a couple of spiles and tubes. And then that usually comes with a workshop and instructions. So those are a really easy way to get into sugaring for $25. But next slide. Okay, we can see most of this, I think. So try to calculate for a hobbyist what are some of if you really want to go all the way to syrup, what are the costs of that? And just by doing a little shopping list here, comes out to about $5.50 if we're going to get a roll of tubing, about 25 spiles, a nice drill bit, which I swear by buying the really good ones from Maple Supply companies. Some instruments for measuring, not too many buckets. We'll talk about buckets in a second. And then you really could take the cost in half if you already had some kind of propane camp stove or something very simple for boiling. You already had your drill, so it would probably be about half of that. But it doesn't cost a lot to get into small scale production. And when I first was tapping with students, when I taught 4th and 5th grade, we had trees on our campus. And so we tapped as part of our curriculum, and we just used that exact stove, and it fit perfectly 2 buffet pans from catering right across the top, and we just kept pouring in sap as it went down, and it was a perfectly manageable way to make syrup and enjoy it. So those are some of the startup costs if you just want to stay small and simple. Next slide. Oh, yes, we definitely promote using recycled buckets as much as possible. We're trying to be as sustainable as we can. No, we use a lot of plastic in maple sugaring, but this Jer scored an entire carload of buckets from Salt and Straw, a beautiful ice cream maker in Portland, and we're constantly getting them from supermarket bakeries. Grand Central Bakery has given us a lot of our buckets. And they're fabulous food grade buckets that we sanitize carefully and use for all kinds of collection.
If you go to one of the places that has worked out really well, if you go to like diners, they have like 4 to 5 gallon jugs that they use for the oil for cooking. That's we've been able to get more than we could ever use. So that's a place that.
Yeah. Oh yes, sorry. So go to diners and get their 4 to 5 gallon jugs of for oil and different products, and they're a really good source of collection containers.
Yeah, I've always found there's always some person on Craigslist in every community that is literally taking something from work that they're trying to get rid of and selling it for a reasonable price. And we've gotten all sorts of 20 gallon, 40 gallon food grade stuff for really reasonable prices. Most of those people have huge amounts of supply of that. So once you meet them, you can ask hey, you have anything like this? And you can surprise them.
So going on Craigslist and finding all those people who have from their businesses are selling recycled containers. Yes.
Just a quick note on that. You got to be careful what you're buying for people. You got to know what was in.
Yeah.
This common back in the Northeast that they have these IBC coats and all these things people sell them. But, they say they have food product in them, but we really got to be careful when you're getting these containers.
Good point. Make sure you know and you trust the people you're getting it from, so you know what was in the food grade containers. Perhaps there was an interim there where it wasn't food grade.
What about cleaning these, the residue and how that might impact or the smell left behind from food stuff? Have you had any issues with that, or maybe even having microbial problems?
I'm glad you bring that up. It does depend on, so the question is cleaning them or having residue of taste or smell in these buckets. You learn which ones you want and which ones you don't want. And so I got a whole donation of pickle buckets from Grand Central, and you cannot get the vinegar smell or taste out of those ever. So yeah, it tends to be the sweeter things. Molasses buckets are good. Some dairy, but it's trial and error. Next slide. And a lot of our sugaring collective members and hobbyists really like using milk jugs or water jugs as a very simple collection system. So you can see these have tubes that are coming down from the spiles, and very closed system, so you're not going to get a lot of bugs in there. And these are really easy to collect, especially for children, school projects. They can bring in a whole bunch of containers that they save over time. So another use of another recycling purpose there. And so this is why we don't, in our kits or in our budget for the startup sugaring supplies for a hobbyist, we don't really put in buckets because most of the time we're just getting them for free. So our budget as a nonprofit, if anybody is interested in going that route, right now we are all volunteers. So you'll notice that there's no salaries yet, but that is a goal, to have an executive director who can get paid so that someone actually could make a living running a Maple nonprofit. That is a goal to see if we can get that to happen. Right now, it's just a $15,000 budget, and we get private foundation grants, very small ones so far. We had this last year was a curriculum development grant from Wan Young Trust, and the individual contributions have been great. So just people giving donations to an educational, environmental nonprofit. People are really interested in it and are willing to give. And we also are starting to have more fundraising events. We're going to try to have a farm to table dinner. And we keep our costs really low. This is sort of the second year in. You see that we're only spending about $2,500 on our sugaring supplies and equipment. And a big part of our budget is our rent at Camp Colton. So we're not just renting the taps there. That would be an insane price for our taps. I think we will scale up to probably 400, 450 taps there. We could go bigger if we wanted to, but what we're paying for at Camp Colton is they let us build a building there on their property, and we have their bathrooms, there's power, and there's water, and there are trails and roads, and it's a community gathering place. So there's so much infrastructure there that we are paying rent, and really collaborating with them on all their projects that they want to do. But if you had your own property and wanted to set up a nonprofit on your own property, that would take off a lot of this expense.
I see your sugar house improvements for $500, but what was the original investment?
Yes.
That's a beautiful, sweet.
Oh, yeah, that's a fun story. I actually have all our startup expenses on the next slide. So she was asking me the sugar house, how much did that cost? Anyway, this is you can run a nonprofit on a tiny budget, and this is how we started because we're just 2 years old. But like I said, the goal would be to figure out the funding for a salary for an executive director at some point. And any ideas are welcome. And I do think the field is wide open for lots of these localized nonprofits. Personally, for me, it has been an amazing way to get into sugaring full time without putting out a bunch of capital. So I did quit my teaching job, and then I promised my family that I would not spend a lot of money on sugaring because I'm all volunteer. At least I'm not spending our own money on it. So it's been really great to get involved, to trying it full time, and to be doing it with other people. Because I realized very quickly when I was tapping with students that it would be a very lonely enterprise to not do it as a community. Next slide. We can't really see. Okay, well so the sugar house was donated. It was, so you can see the timber frame. There's a beautiful business called Hyla Huts that comes from this sustainable forestry business called Hyla Woods in Oregon. And they make timber framed kits for these small buildings. They're 10 by 20, so you don't have to go under the radar with codes. And they happen to have a demo. They happen to have one sitting around in their warehouse, and they donated it to us. So that was a $5,000 donation of that timber frame structure that we were able to raise in a weekend. And then add to it, we added about $3,000 worth of siding and roofing and other things. And then ours, Steve, I apologize. I know I spoke with you when we were looking for equipment. We did not go with Next Generation. Maybe we should have. We went with CDL Vermont, and they gave us a very nice educational discount. So we got 25% off everything. So our total equipment order was not $840. There's a hiding zero there, $8,400 from them. But that included absolutely everything to get started the first season. So really all of our $1,000 worth of tubing for our mainline system, and our wood-fired evaporator, all of our 100 buckets, our 200-gallon stainless tank. We even got a small finishing boiler The freight was $800, not insignificant, but they gave us a discount on that as well. So total startup expenses are 11,300 for what can be a decent size, probably 500 tap operation is where we would top out. So, and then last slide, just to say that it did, so Steve, I hear, came out and did an installation for UW. CDL did not do that for us. It came on a giant pallet, all wrapped up without even a parts or instruction manual. I called Vermont several times saying, are you sure you do not have something that teaches us how to set up this evaporator? But luckily, there were a lot of text messaging going on and videos. So. Next slide. Lots of in-kind donations for a nonprofit. So Neil has even given us syrup for one of our fundraising raffles, and lots of local building supplies. Hyla Huts is on there. Next slide. And then just a plug for this book. If you haven't read it, do. Really can't tell you how much I love this book and Dr. Kimmerer and her messages. She has 2 beautiful chapters in there about maple. And her, why I have this on here in the economics presentation is that she is talking all about a gift, what she calls a gift economy, and a sense of reciprocity with us in the natural world. And how can we, in our modern world, find a way to understand the earth as a gift again? So not losing sight as we think about the economics of sugaring, also of our relationship with the land with sugaring. This will be our last slide, and I'm taking too long. And so when I keep hearing myself talking about the bigleaf maple industry, the bigleaf maple sugaring industry in the Pacific Northwest, and I don't really love that word. So I'm inclined to think of it more as a maple movement. And while it is really important for us to figure out how to make decent income on this really difficult, delicious, worthwhile enterprise, how can we keep sight of more than the dollars? And how can we include people who are underserved and overlooked in this process? How can we be good medicine? The people this is what Dr. Kimmerer talks about, the people in the land being good medicine for each other. How can we nourish the forest as they clearly nourish us? So making sure that that is a part of what we start here in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you.
Could you bring up my first presentation? There's one slide on there. I just want to show people. While he's bringing that up, scroll down. The chart, the table there, number 15. Okay? Yeah. I was writing notes on my copy. But I'll first rip off of what Eliza said about the gift economy and the maple movement. And one of the reasons, even though we're funded by ACER, the Agricultural Marketing Service, to promote commercial opportunities, I don't see how we can have a robust commercial enterprise without a really broad appreciation of non-commercial, that cultural aspect. And to use what Sue, one of the things she would have talked about is informal economy. And a lot of the non-timber forest products I talked about are sort of centered in the informal economy where people will gather medicines that they may have on their property or public lands nearby and trade them to other people. And I think that there's a huge opportunity and is already happening and blossoming with this sort of reciprocity, gift exchange, doing kind things for people, but it has an economic value. It's hard to quantify it and put a number on it, but it has value. We shouldn't lose sight of that, how important it is. And I think just to say how important those things are and how hard they are to measure, we have in Oregon towns like Oak Ridge with 29% unemployment. How do people hang on there? I mean, how are they, and I think so much of it is this helping each other out, these things we don't see going on that have real important economic value. So I wanted to just go back to one of these slides I didn't touch on. It actually fits nicely in the economics thing, but I've just been playing around with a table, sort of trying to assess how does somebody go in and say, yeah, I have something that I could make money on here. It's not just about just having maple on your land. There are these other really important factors like the abundance, density, how much is there and how easy is it to get to. And I sort of playing around with this scale from desirable to undesirable. You probably have some good ideas on how we can, I can improve this, but it's just starting point for conversation. But issues like soil moisture, the accessibility, I showed you a picture of a really tough ravine, having some downslope, if you don't have the luxury of lifters and high vacuum and so on, you may really need to rely on nice gravity flow without bellies and so on. So that may go into your factor about, do I have an economically viable site? And then of course, like the wildlife and especially the elk. And for Brian, if you haven't seen Brian's video of the bear popping out of the maple tree, you have to check that out. Pardon? He was tapping and the bear jumped out at him. It's like, that's my home. Anyway, and accessibility by road and winter, right? Really, like that can be such a make or break deal if you're going to go commercial, especially in places like the Willamette Valley. Mud roads will not work. Maybe for a little short distance or so on. You talk to Joe here. He works really hard using a bucket system, and it has some great advantages. He really is tuned into his individual trees in a really intimate way, but he has to traverse a lot of mud terrain, and that is a whole other added cost for him. Could we bring up, we don't have to bring up Sue's talk. She has a slide on there with a whole bunch of pictures, and these have been popping up in other talks and whatnot. But I just wanted to mention some of the other products, and maybe we could just have even, people could shout out different things they're doing. But we talked about the maple flowers. I think one of the potentially big products in the Northwest, because this is like the birth of the craft beer industry and cider industry in a lot of ways, in Oregon and Washington. And maple water is a nutrient-rich, wonderful base to substitute your dirty city water from, or your chlorine-ridden city water, where so many of these breweries are getting their water. Devin and I have talked a lot about this recently. With this is, you might have an opportunity to form a relationship with a craft brewer and supply them. And it's not hard to come up with thousands of gallons of sap. It's hard to make it into syrup.
Yeah, so I've been talking about, so I'm also a flower farmer, and so I'm also a flower farmer, and the Bigleaf maple bugs, I will report back in a year if I've had success selling them to florists, but I feel like they are an untapped beauty. They have really
dramatic and almost tropical look to them, and they last forever.
It's a great thing. There's a whole bunch of things on your back 40 that could go in to complement that. You could form a relationship with a hotel, like a boutique hotel, like the Benson in Portland. Well, they pay like $400, $500 a week for like a floral arrangement in their lobby. And, you know, just from the sticks and twigs and, you know, beautiful maple buds and so on, you can make gorgeous arrangements. I have some video links for you to people like Betty Shores who pioneered a lot of that kind of stuff. But anyway, so what are some other products that people can envision? Yeah.
This is so crazy, but one thing, this is a lot of work. For the right people, you can make yarn from metals, which I tried, and we all have lots of metals. And so it's a thing that would be experiential.
Like from making yarn from something to do with like maple leaves, maybe?
Well, no, I'm thinking the metals that are growing around you.
So vegetation in association with the maple. Yeah, great one. Others? Just throw some things out. Yeah, Trevor. Figured wood. So the book went around with the burls and so on. As we start maybe moving away from just totally wild systems, there might be chances to manipulate the wood by bending over the saplings for a couple of years, stressing them. That's what creates your figured wood.
Yeah, I have a friend who's doing that, what's it called? Where 1 year you're sapling, you tie it this way, and then the next year you tie it the other direction. I think that's all you have to do, and then the grain is wavy. And then apparently Bigleaf maple is desirable for luthiers and guitar making when they're mature and you have to cut them.
Nice. So we've got some figured wood samples out there, but there's maple waters. Yeah, Ken?
Eliza mentioned fours, and I know Neil's Bigleaf does fours, but like, I think we all have friends that are like on the Big Island of Hawaii, that grow vanilla and coffee. They make more money on their fours than they do on their vanilla.
Yeah, nice. Got Barb again.
I wonder if you could do something for leaves, you know, press them in some way and then put advertisements on them.
I
Or something
have
like that, or something.
Pat Mooney with Oregon Craft Products. I mean, he gathers cones. He has lots and lots of things. Pat's an amazing resource, but he sells bags of cones that end up selling for like $5 in craft stores on the East Coast. His sort of mantra is exotic is where you ain't. Yes, Marilyn? Sugar. So I believe Mike Farrell brought some maple sugar to at least show.
I did not bring maple sugar, I brought maple cotton candy that's made with maple sugar.
Maple cotton candy that's made with maple sugar. Wonderful. Oh, nice. Wonderful. Daryl, did you have anything?
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking of value-added products like maple ice cream or maple syrup, but like I made a burdock syrup with maple syrup.
So value-added products, I think that's like, I mean, you know, I pour sugar maple syrup on my pancakes, but I just can't pour Bigleaf on it. But I use it all the time to make sauces, glazes. You can drizzle some like on a nice old world loaf of bread, and it's just pungent and wonderful. Yeah. I'll just stop there and
All right, great. All right, well, thanks very much. I'm glad to talk about basically the economics, from my perspective, how to make money or lose less money at sugaring. That's where I come, that's my career and background. I should also just say, I love hobby sugaring. I have 160,000 taps, but I'm also building a little sugar house in my backyard for 50 taps. Do it with my family because I love it. Okay, and I think everybody should do it. So I'm going to talk about how you can actually make money at it, make a living from it. But even if you're not, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You should just try to lose less money because it's better when you lose less. we all spend money on our hobbies. That's what makes it a hobby, right? And so this is a very worthwhile hobby if it's not a business. You get something great out of it, not just the product, but the experience as well. So, I get it. Okay. So if you think about how do you increase your profit of what you're doing and with any business, and we're talking about maple sugaring here, Bigleaf in particular, you either have to reduce your costs or increase your income. And to increase your income, you have to make more of what you're producing or sell it at a higher price. Okay. And here, Bigleaf maple is already sold at a really high price. Maybe there's more room to continue to bring that price up, but the bigger opportunity is probably just to make more of it. Because everybody's selling out of what you make already at a pretty high price. And so there are definitely ways to reduce your costs, and we'll be talking about lots of those things throughout the conference. And also reducing your costs on a per unit basis, or per pound, or per gallon, or whatever. And the more efficient you get, you might have the same cost into it, but you've made more, so your cost per gallon goes down, cost per cap goes down. So there's different ways to think about that. And we've all heard, you got to work smarter, not harder, right? Which is somewhat true, but in this business, you have to do both. Okay? It is hard work no matter what, and you have to be smart about it to make sure that you're doing it right if you want to make money at it. And what a lot of people will like to do is keep records. You like to do it, do sugaring, but keeping all the records is not so much fun for a lot of people. Some people love it, and if you're loving it, that's something you're really into. It's great because you need to have that. You can't manage what you can't measure, right? So you need to know what your costs are, what your revenue is. You have to know all that stuff in order to understand where you're doing well, where you need improvement, and what you can do about it. Okay, if you don't have good records, if you don't have good data, you're just, making guesses. We talked about this a little bit last night. Somebody asked a question about it. What are economies of scale? It just means if you do something at a larger scale, you can spread out your fixed costs over a larger volume. In any business, you have fixed costs and variable costs. In maple sugaring, you have a lot of fixed costs to get started. Your variable costs are usually just a fraction of what your fixed costs are. Okay, so if we just look at this, and we're going to spend, and we're not going to go past 12 because that's when lunch is. Is that correct, Ken? That's correct. Okay. So we're going to go through an Excel file. It's basically a spreadsheet, net present value breakdown that I used to use with my students. I used to teach maple sugaring class at local university, and every student who took the class, what they had to do, their final project, and 50% of their grade, was developing a business plan for a sugaring operation. Something that they were going to do, or hypothetical, or whatever, and they all use this template. And it's a pretty good template to figure out your costs and your potential revenues and all that stuff. So we're going to go through an example of that. It's going to show us all what all the fixed costs are and what your variable costs are. Okay, so when you think about it, if you're going to go out and buy land to do sugaring, that's a big fixed cost. If you're holding on to the land because you're going to do sugaring, that's an opportunity cost. You could sell it. You have to pay the taxes on it every year. Okay, so how do you think about that? And if it's just you're going to cap some trees on land you're going to hold anyways, you wouldn't sell it anyways, maybe you don't really factor that. But in our case, we went out and spent a lot of money on land to do maple sugaring. So we had a lot of fixed costs to start our business. Some people were talking about maybe buying some land to do some sugaring. Once you start getting that, that becomes a really huge fixed cost. That's hopefully appreciating in value. The land should be going up in value as well. It's an investment, but it's an initial cost. You have to Think about it. Putting up your sugar house and any sap collection buildings, all the equipment you have to buy, that's probably not even an exhaustive list. You might need a vehicle for hauling sap depending on your situation, or it should be some of your vehicle you already have to the sugaring. You likely have to buy an insurance policy for your business if you're doing it as a business. And no matter how many trees you tap, or how much sap runs that year, how good is the year you have, you incur those costs. That's why they're fixed. On the variable, if you decide to tap 100 trees, or you decide to tap 500 trees, you're gonna have more cost. Every tree you tap is gonna be more labor to go tap trees, collect sap, and boil that sap in the syrup. More either wood or oil or whatever you're using to boil the sap, electricity to run the ROs, if you have an RO, and all that stuff. So there's definitely a variable cost on the fuel and your labor, which are your top two things. Fuel and your labor are most of your cost of making syrup on a variable basis. And then you have other stuff, and it just continues to add up, right? One of the best cost of production studies, this is out of date. It was done back and published in 2003, so forget about what the numbers say. Just look at the trend. They look at maple syrup operations in Quebec, which makes most of the syrup in the world. They looked at small, medium, and large operations, and I think a medium operation was less than 10,000 taps. Right, so small was, I forget, it was still commercial but small, so maybe like at least 500, but less than 5,000 or something. I forget what the numbers were, but generally speaking, if you look at that, the small producer cost them $4 a pound, medium $2.61, and large $2.06. The larger you get, the lower the cost is to meet, because you're spreading out those fixed costs over a much larger farm. And so the small producers, you're just never going to be able to make it at the price that it's worth. Right now, maple syrup is worth $2.50 to $2.80 a pound. Okay, that's what if you sell it in a drum in the East Coast. Nobody is coming close to making it for $2.50 to $2.80 a pound in the Pacific Northwest. Most people in the East are not making it for $2.50 to $2.80 a pound. The large producers are. Most of the small producers, it costs them more than that. So what can you do? Especially here is just adding more taps to your operation, spreading out those fixed costs with more taps, because your variable revenues, the amount of money you get from each tap you put out, is usually, hopefully, a lot more than what it costs you to put out that tap and manage that tap. So for every one you add, you're helping pay down that initial investment. Okay? And so that's why the large producers do better in that regard. What I'm going to talk about this afternoon, we have, I think, a 45-minute session all about buying sap. So I'm not going to talk about it here, but know that we're going to cover that this afternoon, as rather than adding the tap yourself, working with others who want to collect the sap, boiling it for them is one of the best things you could do under certain circumstances. We'll talk all about that this afternoon. And then there's a bunch of other stuff you can do in terms of, you spend all that money. You can go out and spend $10,000, $15,000 setting up a whole tubing system, buying all the stuff, putting it all in. If you don't do it right, you're not going to get nearly as much sap. So your cost per tap goes much higher, your cost per pound to produce it, if you don't do it right. So you have to, you're the ones who came to this conference. You're the ones who want to do it right. All right, so you came here to learn how to do all this properly. People who just go out without knowing what to do and just spend the money and not do it in the most efficient way, don't get as much sap as they could, and their cost to produce it just was much higher. Right, so what you're doing, taking the initiative to learn how to do everything the best way is actually what you should be doing. Okay, and then you gotta go out and fix all your vacuum leaks. There's an expression, you make your money in the woods. Okay, all you're trying to do in the sugar house is control costs and make sure you don't screw it up. Right? The valuable product is the sap coming out of the tree. And the way you get the most sap is by not having any vacuum leaks. Okay? So we strive to have 27 inches of vacuum at the end of every tap hole throughout the entire woods. Okay? At all times. We have remote monitoring systems to measure that everywhere. And Brian came out to work with us for 2 months in our sugar bush this year with our team, which they're out every day fixing all the leaks. We know where they are from remote monitoring, we're going out and we're fixing them. That's the only way our business would be profitable, is if we fix all our leaks and we get high back.
If you don't have a meter, how's the best way to tell if you have a leak, especially if you're using a gravity? Are the bubbles an indicator?
A great question. So Richard's asking, if you don't have a monitoring system, you don't have a vacuum, you're just going on 3/16 gravity, you can tell by looking at the lines and the flow of the line whether or not it's running as it should.
So the bubbles, I noticed when I had a blockage or something, it would produce bubbles down the line. And I just noticed that in your line there. I didn't know if that was.
Yeah, when you're out looking for leaks, you're looking at the bubbles.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll probably get to that. Okay, question.
Just say at Rich's property, I was surprised this winter how many lines get blocked by the shade from the.
Yeah.
And we have full vacuum at the top, but nothing coming out of the bottom. It was really important to block the lines frequently and look for those blockages.
So Ken was saying that not just looking for leaks, but looking for blockages, especially on 3/16 tubing, especially if you're not as careful as you could be when you're tapping. You got to be extremely vigilant because you have all this moss growing on the trees, and you got to. Eliza made a great point. Buy that expensive drill bits. Okay, and we buy the expensive drill bits and we switch them out every 1,000 taps. So that you always have a good, clean, fresh bit to make a good, clean, fresh hole and get that spout in without any residue around it. Because you don't want any blockage in your line, you don't want any leakage around that spout. That's the most critical thing you do is how you drill that hole, how you sweat that, where you put it in the tree, because it all determines how much sap you get out of that. And how much sap you get out of the tree is what really determines the economics of your production, which is half your business, and then sales is the other half, right? So producing syrup is one business, taking that syrup you produce and selling it is another. Question?
Also, one benefit of having a good sharp drill bit is you don't scratch the outside cambium layer. It anchors into the tree because that's a potential leak around the edge of your hole too. So invest in a good bit.
You were spending a lot of time on this week, but could you just tell us some of the things you do to fix the leaks?
Sure, yeah. So the question was, what do you do to fix the leaks? Most of the leaks are caused by tapping into a bad part of the tree or a bad tree. Okay, so the number one thing you do is you only run tubing, or you look up before you tap. Okay, and I know how to identify a really good, healthy tree. Because a dead or dying, dead tree is going to give you nothing. A dying tree is going to give you some sap, but more likely to produce a vacuum. And then you deal with squirrels and broken fittings and branches falling down and all the other stuff that's obvious. All those leaks are obvious. The leaks that's not obvious is when you put a tap hole into a bad tree or a bad spot on a tree.
So you're just recapping?
No, we just cap it off because our trees don't grow like your trees. We can't drill more than one hole in the tree a year, sustainably. Yeah, so we drill one hole in the tree per year, and if that was a bad hole, then it gets capped off. and then we'll drill in a different spot the next year. Bigleaf maple grows a lot faster and can withstand a higher tapping intensity than maple and leaves grows, especially in our forest, which are in the mountains. It doesn't have the best soil. Question?
I noticed a lot of, like leakage from trees around sapsucker damage and things like that. Do you have corresponding cracking leak in those areas? If you were to tap near an area where a tree's got like sapsucker woodpecker damage, that whole thing?
Yeah, so the question was, you see leakage around sapsuckers, they're poking into that layer and they're creating sap flow as well. If that's an open wound into it, if you have high enough vacuum, if you tap close to an area that's an open part of the tree, it's going to leak through that area. And when you go to do that second tap, if you're going to tap more than once in a season, you got to make sure you either cap off somehow, different ways of plugging that hole that's not producing a lot of sap anymore, but it's still an open wound into the tree. Be far enough away from it so you're not sucking air through that hole. So there was a lot of research done on 3/16 versus 5/16 tubing in the last, say, 7 to 8 years. There is no place 5/16 tubing should ever be used except for with a high vacuum tubing system. You'll always do better with 3/16 tubing, even if it's just, you got a tree, you want to put it down to a bucket. Research has shown that 3/16 tubing will do much better than 5/16. And especially here in the Pacific Northwest where you don't have as much freezing and thawing. It'll generate a little bit of a vacuum and it'll keep the tap hole from drying up soon. So 3/16 tubing, and especially if you can clean it well. Because your first year with 3/16 tubing, you're going to get a lot of sap. Your second year, you're going to get a lot less. Because if you don't do a good job cleaning it, and it's not easy to clean, but you can clean it. But you have to be very vigilant about that. 5/16 tubing will also get dirty. Will also give you less sap in the future, but you get no benefit. There's no vacuum ever created in 5/16 tubing. So if you can just even have a little thing where you get a little slope, you get 8 to 10 inches of vacuum, that's going to be much better than just a bucket hanging on a tree. Although, if you got kids coming out to get those Easter eggs, buckets, that's great, you know. That's why you do buckets. From a production perspective, this is how to make money at sugar. 3/16 tubing is cheaper than 5/16 tubing, easier to work with, and you're going to get a higher yield. Okay? If you're using a high vacuum system, you can go with 5/16 tubing because you're getting the vacuum from your vacuum pump, not from coming down the line. The 3/16 tubing generates its own vacuum on a slope. You get as much slope as you can, and you keep it as clean as you can. And you'll do well with 3/16 tubing.
Mike, can I ask a question on this?
Yes.
So we've been both in 3/16 and 5/16, and the 3/16 was definitely a lot more problematic with the shavings because we're often working in these extremely wet conditions, which is really hard to keep blow the chips out of the tap hole and whatnot. But the one thing I noticed, I think I'm noticing, is on the 3/16 that we had a lot more problems with the big trees pulling the sap back.
Yeah, so Eric was talking about, here's the problem with 3/16. The great thing about it is it gets more sap out of the tree by the capillary action. The problem is that when it freezes, it pulls back into the tree. Okay, so that much more so than 5/16. Both of them will do it. Question?
Comes with the shavings and the holes, I've heard like don't mess around inside the hole or anything like that. Is there any value in like bringing the can air out, blowing the hole out after you do your ones with the drill? Or
So the question was, is there value in bringing canned air out to blow out your shavings out of the hole? I've never tried it. Has anybody done that? Steve has? Yes.
In Alaska, having purchased there, we did that. What I do is take a can of compressed air, find it in the office store, yeah. I super glue the tip onto it so it doesn't come off. And, the key to it is doing it before the sap is running. Because when you do it when the sap is running, you get it back. You gotta, it gets messy, it's sticky. So, but that's what we do up there because, the birch trees don't, shape clean like the maples do, kind of do. So we adopt that. Don't have to.
And Greg has a comment as well.
We could use it a baby stop holder a little bit. Like one of those things you take into a baby's nose and pull up, just kind of pop these little bits out. It's not as good as it.
Yeah, so the baby's not polar or the can air? Yes.
I just took a, coat hanger.
Yeah.
Sterilize the tip on and push it in there.
Yeah.
Rub it around.
Yeah, the coat hanger, just make sure you clean it all out. That works. Also, there's usually a lot of twigs just around. Sometimes people don't bring the coat hanger. They just use the twig nearby to clean it out.
What I found that works really well is a CO2 tank and then a regulator made for like contractors so they can run their air nailer. That works. You get like 200 PSI if you want it.
You can really blow them out with that works really good. That's for sure.
I blew out some of the 3/16 line when it had a plug, and sometimes that worked in blowing whatever out. Anyway.
Yeah. Yep.
So you say it sucks the sap back in when it warms up?
When it freezes, when the weather gets below freezing, the trees develop an internal vacuum and suck water out of the ground through their roots, and they'll also suck water or sap right back out of the tubing connected to the spout inside the tree. Got another question?
Yeah, well, I've tried the ball checks.
The check valve spouts, yes.
The first year they work great. Second year, you might as well just throw them away because they're very difficult to clean.
So check valve spouts are meant to be used once. In fact, all plastic spouts are meant to be used once. You can get them for 15 check valves are more like 40, 45 cents each. But there's been a lot of research looking at cleaning spouts or using used spouts or getting new spouts every year. And one of the very best investments you can make is buying a new spout every year. Clean your drop lines, clean your tubing as good as you can, but don't try to clean your spouts. Unless they're metal, unless they're stainless steel, you can get a stainless steel spout and you can clean the stainless steel spouts for buckets. But if you're using plastic spouts on a tubing system, it always pays to put in a new spout. And I'd say especially out here where you're dealing with such warm temperatures.
You guys want to use plastic spouts, I'm assuming, for vacuum systems. You never have, there's not like a metal solution for vacuum systems.
The question was, do we use plastic spouts for a tubing system? There are some stainless spouts for tubing systems, but we have not gotten those. Question?
What's the normal lifespan for the tubing?
The question was, what's the normal lifespan for the tubing? Main lines, the 3/4 or 1 inch main line, you should be able to get 20 to 30 years out of that without a problem. And then the question is your lateral line tubing. The first year you put it in, it's awesome. You're gonna get the best yield ever. And then it's just a question of how much is your yield going down over time and what's your appetite to replace that. Because you're going to have your yield go down every year as your tubing gets more contaminated. Until you decide, you know what, I should replace that. And keeping good records and seeing how much you're getting and knowing how much it's going to cost you to replace it, you can then make a cost-benefit decision of when should I replace my tubing. It'll be good. You can keep it out there for 15 or 20 years, but it might not be the best economic decision to do so.
Okay, two questions. Why does that happen? And second of all, out here, we have such a short run. It's like a day or two with warm weather, and then, it doesn't freeze for another 6 weeks. So it's so hard, and we have such a short window of collection. It seems like it's pretty expensive ordeal to have to change that out when you have a very limited run in that tubing.
Right, yeah, so the question is, you have such limited periods of sap flow here, and so can it pay for itself, right? To switch out that tubing for just a limited amount of sap flow.
And how can you measure it? Because every year the weather conditions.
And how do you measure it? Because every year is so different, the weather. That's keeping good records, right? So and then you play the law of averages, because there's going to be a good year, there's going to be a bad year. There's going to be an average, a bad year, a good year, whatever. So you're going to know what your average yield is, because you can take the good with the bad, and then you're going to base it on what you expect in an average year, and then see if it can pay for itself. These are great questions. We're not going to answer them all today. We're also not going to be late for lunch. And so I'm going to just show you the Excel file where everybody who comes to the conference is going to get it. I'm sure we can email it to everybody, can? Yeah. And then you can put in the numbers for your operation. And you guys can do your own analysis, and you can figure it out. I'll show you. Okay, so can you pull up that? Yeah, that's it.
You can use this mouse.
Okay. It's good it didn't get screwed up like the PowerPoints.
Hang on a second. I gotta get us back any drive from it.
Oh, you're controlling that. Okay.
I need to get us recorded here. Okay.
Okay, now I'm going to zoom in on this. And I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to have to talk a little bit with my back to you, but hopefully it'll be. Can I take that seat? Sure. That's great. Yeah. Okay, so just want to show you on this, there are 4 tabs. There are 4 tabs down here. This is the input data, and anything that's highlighted in yellow, you'll put in for your operation. Okay? This will be specific to your operation for anything highlighted in yellow. And we'll go through what those things are. And then you have 3 different tabs: your own sugar house. This is buying sap from somebody else. And this is if you're going to be a sap seller. If you're not going to make the syrup, but you're just going to sell to somebody. Okay? And so everything correlates back to your input data here. So I just made up some numbers that were somewhat reasonable, but they're obviously going to be different for everybody. Okay. So you put in how many taps you have. You can put in different labor rates for. I have it listed here as a sap collection labor. This is somebody to help you out. And then I have sap processing. That's usually the owner and the one in the sugar house making the syrup. So what you want to pay yourself or what you have to pay somebody. What do you think your time is worth? You can put that there. This is how many people are going to be processing sap. You put in what you think is going to take you to install your tubing, how many, and this is all in minutes per tap, so the minutes per tap to originally put out your tubing system, this is to maintain it, to do your tapping and leak checking and spout pulling every year, and this is just off-season to go walk your lines and fix anything that, you know, happens to get broken in the off-season. You put in what your syrup is worth. Before the bottling and the label and going out and selling it, all that stuff. That's a whole nother, we could do another big session on that. But what is your syrup worth to you just intrinsically before that is what you put here. You put in what your production per tap is, how many gallons of syrup per tap you get in a given year. Okay, and you'll know that from your records. What your fuel cost is for every gallon of syrup produced. How many gallons of syrup you make an hour. What you initially spent on all your tubing materials or just buckets or whatever you're doing, but on a per tap basis, how much did that cost you per tap? What your replacement strategy is. So this is if you're just going to do a new spout every year, or some people are going to want to replace the entire drop line every year. Okay, so you have that to choose. And you put in what the cost of a new spout and drop line would be. This is your annual decline in syrup production. Your first year is always going to be your best year. How much is it going to dive off over time? Okay. So you put that in. On average, you know, your first year might not be the best year if the weather's bad, but I'm just saying from a tubing perspective, you got the best opportunity the first year. What's going to cost you to store your syrup? We have that twice, gallons produced per hour. So probably don't need that. There's some financial stuff in here. If you're doing this investment on a larger scale, but you have to put in, if you're leasing the trees, what you're paying on a lease rate per tap, or if you own the trees, how much of your property taxes do you want to attribute to your sugaring operation? And then what is that on a per tap basis? If you want to really include all the costs. Discount rate, we're not going to get into that, but it's just the fact that if I offer you $100 today or $100 5 years from now, everybody's going to say, give me $100 today. Because money's not worth the same in the future as it is now. And then you put in what your property taxes or your lease cost is on an annual basis. You can do that too. If you're hauling sap, there's a whole bunch of variables about what's going to cost you. We only have 5 minutes left, so I'm not going to get into that. We'll talk about that during the sap buying this afternoon. And then you have your fixed costs, and you can put in whatever it costs you for all of these things here. Okay? So the land, the vehicle, your buildings, your tanks, pumps, releasers, filters, evaporator, RO, all your miscellaneous tools, any overhead you want to associate with it. So that's all where you put in your fixed costs. And then in this scenario, for what I put in there, let's just look to see how this works out. Let's just say this is for your own sugaring operation. If you see any of these cells, they just reference what the input in the summary data file says. So all this is just what we put in. It just references that. If we change it on the other file, it changes it here. What this shows for this 1,000 tap operation, you can look at this, and this is on a net present value analysis because that thing about the discount rate, about we're discounting future costs or revenues to what it is today because it's not worth the same in the future. And then you look at those costs and revenues over time to what's your investment today. And that's how a lot of people make investment decisions of whether 5 or 10 years from now, my costs and revenues over time discounted, and what's my investment worth today if I were to do this? So if you look at this, then this is the net present value, this section here on a per tap basis, and this is for the entire sugar butcher, your entire operation. So just looking at it on a per tap basis, it cost, on this example, over $100 per tap the first year. And then every year after that, your variable costs, it's in the $5 range. That's what I was talking about, is your fixed costs, which drive you down. Your variable costs are usually not that high. Okay, so, and then your annual revenues, we have those constantly going down as well for two reasons. Number one, we're discounting future revenues based on the discount rate, but then also we're expecting we're not going to make as much syrup year after year because our tubing is getting more degraded. So on the first year, we lost $76 a tap. The second year, we actually made every tap, we made $17 a tap. That's pretty good. Okay, because our revenue was $22 a tap, and it only cost us $5.48. And so the way you pay down that fixed cost of the $100 a tap to get started is having more taps. Of course, the more taps you have, the more fixed cost it gets to get started. It's a lot more cost to put in 5,000 taps than it is 500 taps. Okay, so you can look at it over time. This is the net present value. You see that you're down $76 a tap. You keep on making that less, closer to, and then finally by this year, by 2029 is when you start to turn a profit. You're up to $4.59 a tap, and by the end of it, in 10 years, you've made $28 a tap based on this. This is a hypothetical. You got to do it for your operation. Okay. So this is, and it's 11:59. This is the one for your own sugar house where you're making syrup. There's also the same thing, and this will be a sneak preview of this afternoon. But this is for buying sap. Your cost is $2.80 per tap, and you're making $12.57. So you're right off the bat, you're automatically making money buying sap. Because you're using those fixed costs, you're getting to use them more to generate revenue. That's what we'll be talking about this afternoon. And then this is if you're selling sap, you don't have as high a fixed cost. We took out the evaporator and the ROs and all that stuff. So our fixed cost went down to reduced in the first year to $92. Our revenues were less. It took us, at this point, in this example, we're at 63 cents. It was by 2027, we were, and then in this scenario, selling sap, we made $54. Okay, it might be more profitable for some people to sell sap because you don't have as much initial investment. It all depends on what you can get for the syrup and what your cost of processing would be. The one thing you have to change here is you have to put in what percentage of the revenue you would get. And that's going to vary by situation, and we'll pick up this afternoon the buying sap.